Hello there, and welcome to this tutorial video showing you how to use my Max application Maximal Rhythm. Maximal Rhythm works by sending MIDI data to any program that you like. Today I'm going to be using it in combination with Ableton Live. So first of all, we need to go to the Ableton Live preferences. In the Ableton Live preferences window, make sure that the Link MIDI tab is selected on the left hand side. And we're going to use two MIDI buses to send data from Max to Ableton Live, and they're called From Max 1 and From Max 2. So we need to make sure that both of these buttons are switched to on. They can be off or they can be on. So as long as these two buttons are on, you can send MIDI data from Max to Ableton Live. Now if you use the Maximal Rhythm app in combination with any other program, you'll have to make sure that in the preferences of that other program, whatever it might be, whether it's Reason or Cubase or anything else which can accept MIDI data, that you do a similar sort of thing. As long as the program is set up to accept data on these two MIDI buses, it will work. So now that we know that we can send MIDI data from Maximal Rhythm, which is a Max application, to Ableton Live, let's just have a quick look at this Ableton Live session. The Ableton Live session is very simple. It has one track called Drum Rack, on which there is a drum rack. On that drum rack, I've imported 5 samples. Now, the samples have been imported onto the pads which are housed on C3, C#3, D3, D#3, and E3. And if you look up here to Maximal Rhythm, you can see that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main parts of Maximal Rhythm, and they're mapped to those same MIDI notes: C3, C#3, D3, D#3, and E3. So let's just have a quick listen to the 5 samples that I've imported into the drum rack, and I'm just going to trigger them by using these play buttons directly on the pads. We have a kick sound, a hi-hat, snare 1, snare 2, and snare 3. So let's have a look at what we can do with the kick sample. Now I've placed my kick sample on the C3 pad, so any triggering of the kick sample that we want to do is going to be done via this section of Maximal Rhythm. Now you'll notice that if you compare C3, C#3, D3, D#3 and E3 together, that C3 is slightly more involved. There are slightly more controls to C3 than there are with the other individual MIDI notes from Maximal Rhythm. And that's because Maximal Rhythm is designed for you to place a kick sample, or whatever you would say is your most important sample, onto C3, because you can work with the MIDI data that comes from C3 in a slightly more involved way. So let's have a look at that. I'm just going to press the space bar, and you'll notice that this cross will go green, and some numbers on Maximal Rhythm will also start to move. You won't actually hear anything though until I press this button, and that's because each of the individual modules of Maximal Rhythm can be quickly switched on or off by pressing the activation buttons like so. So I press spacebar, and you can see that this cross has gone green to tell you that Maximal Rhythm is currently in play mode, and also the quarter note count is moving by. Let me just switch on this C3 activation button and you'll start to hear the kick drum. Okay, so as the quarter note numbers tick by, you'll hear one kick drum after another. First of all, let's just look at how we can change the velocity information that's coming out of Maximal Rhythm. You have two main options. You can either have fixed velocity, and you can set that fixed velocity by selecting this number. I'm just clicking and dragging here with the number. You can also select the number and then type a value and hit enter. And when it loads up, it will default to a velocity value of 100. Or you can have a random value. When Maximal Rhythm first loads up, it will select random value for you. If I select fixed value, this cross goes black to show you that you're now in fixed velocity value. So let's have a listen to that. Okay, and if I click and move this value while we're listening to that, you should be able to hear the change in volume. Okay, but when it first loads up, it will play randomly. Now, with random velocity, you can select the range of values. So at the minute, the lowest possible velocity value that the kick will be triggered at is 30, and the highest possible is 100. If we reduce that, so I make the lowest possible 0 and the highest possible 50, you should be able to hear that all the notes are quite a lot quieter, but they will still be randomized. And we can change those numbers on the fly as Maximal Rhythm is in play mode. Let's have a look at what the controls on the right hand side of the C3 module enable you to do. The one at the top is called bar fixed velocity. Now what that does if you activate it is it configures Maximal Rhythm to send a fixed velocity value to the C3 pad in this drum rack at the beginning of each bar. In order to be able to hear this effect more clearly, I'm going to make sure that we are currently in random velocity mode, which we are. I'm going to change the top of the range to 100 and the bottom of the range to 30 as it was when we first loaded it up. I'm then going to turn on bar fixed velocity and press play. Okay, now the thing to notice when we're listening to this is this quarter note count. It's fairly simple to see that the quarter note count box simply changes value on every quarter note. When you have bar fixed velocity switched on, every time the quarter note count shows the number 1, the velocity value which is sent through to the C3 pad mirrors whichever value you have in this box. Okay, so if we turn this up to full, every time this number says 1, a velocity value of 127 is sent through to C3, which is why you're probably seeing this go into the red a little bit. Now I advise to have it on 100 just to make sure there's no distortion. Every other quarter note, you'll hear a kick sound with the velocity value somewhere between the lowest part of the random range and the highest part of the random range. Now if you wanted, you could have it a fixed value that's slightly lower. So on the first quarter note of every bar, the value will be 100 and every other note will be 67. But if you want it to be a little bit more natural, you can combine bar fixed velocity with random. Now then, that's quite interesting in a simple 4/4 time signature, but when it really comes into its own is when you change the time signature to be something non-standard. Now you can change the numerator to be any value that you want between 1 and pretty much as high as you want to go. So I'm clicking and dragging the numerator value there, but let me just go back to 4. So we're in 4/4 here. Why don't we just change this to 5/4 and have a listen. Okay, so then we're in a 5/4 time. So as I say, we can click and drag this, or we can click and type in a number and press enter to change to 3/4 maybe if we want. We can also tell Maximal Rhythm that we wanted to decide randomly what the time signature is going to be. So let me turn random on. Now in the same way that you can select the lower part of the lower limit of the velocity range and the higher limit of the velocity range, you can select the lower limit of the numerator and the higher limit of the numerator as well. This will go all the way up to 99 and as low as 3, and the lowest that will go is 2. So if we say that the lowest numerator value we want to have is number 2 and the highest numerator value we want to have is number 9, every bar the time signature will change and it will be a random value between 2 and 9. Have a listen. Okay, so that's quite handy for creating music with a random time signature that changes every bar. If you don't want it to change every bar, you can press this button here to change it once. I'm just going to turn random off and set it off and running. Watch while the maximal rhythm is running. I'm going to press this button every now and then, and you'll see that the time signature will change. Again, these values are subject to the range that we set in these boxes here. Okay, so the only other control to show you within the C3 module here is the distinction between relative time, or quarter notes in the C3 module, and absolute time. Now with relative time, that means musical time, so bars and beats. Absolute time refers to the time that we normally use in our everyday lives, which is minutes and seconds. And with each of the modules in Maximal Rhythm, you have the option to trigger sounds in relative time or absolute time. Let's just have a quick listen again to the quarter notes on the C3 module. Okay, so that's a regular 4/4 beat. If we change to absolute time by pressing the absolute button, notice that this cross here is going to change gold, like so. So this cross shows you with a quick visual indication whether you're in relative time for blue or absolute time for gold. Now we've got a choice of triggering sounds every 0.9th of a second, every 0.7, every 0.6, 0.2, 0.1 or 0.075. Let's have a quick listen to the difference between those. I'm just going to switch to fixed velocity and turn the fixed velocity up so we can hear this a little bit better. Okay, now an important point to mention about that, if I quickly go back to relative time and hit play, I'm going to change the tempo as Maximal Rhythm is in play mode, and you'll hear the tempo change. Now that's because we're in relative time. If we go to absolute time and then change the tempo, the tempo change has absolutely no change on the sound whatsoever because we're in absolute time, which remember is minutes and seconds. Okay, so the controls that I've already shown you how to use are the same controls that you'll find on C#3, D3, D#3 and E3. The only difference between C3 and the other modules, other than these extra controls on the right hand side here, is that you have more values to choose from with the relative timings on these modules over here than you do with C3. Remember, on C3 you can only have quarter notes for relative time. So for relative time on the other modules you can choose between a whole note, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16ths or 32nd notes. Let's just have a quick listen to the hi-hat on C#3. I'm going to set that to a fixed velocity volume, a fixed velocity value, and then cycle through these different relative values. And remember, with relative values, if I change this hi-hat to quarter notes, that if we change the tempo of Maximal Rhythm, you'll hear the tempo difference. But with the absolute values, if I change C#3 to absolute timing, there's no difference at all with the tempo change. So again, the absolute timing values are the same that you get in the C3 module. So that covers the basic controls of the Maximal Rhythm application. Have a look on my website for another video which I'm going to put up shortly, which shows you how to record MIDI data into the Ableton Live session and how to put together some sort of composition using a combination of the Maximal Rhythm application and my other Max application, the drone machine. Thank you for watching.